She was sitting outside the Kroger on Westheimer Road, my daughter, with my 4-year-old granddaughter pressed against her side, and 3 suitcases arranged around the bench like walls. Her husband had dropped them there. Not at my door. Not at a hotel. At a grocery store parking lot on a Thursday afternoon in July, as if they were something he needed to return. I was 4 blocks away when Reuben called me. He was already there. He'd been watching since Tuesday, when my son-in-law's father had fired my daughter with a 20-minute meeting and a security escort to the door. I'd told Reuben to stay on her. He did. He always does. Pull around to the front entrance, I told my driver. She's by the carts. I saw her before she saw me. Marisol, my youngest, 34 years old, sitting with her shoulders folded in like she was trying to take up less space in the world. My granddaughter was asleep against her, one small hand still wrapped around the strap of her mother's purse. The kind of grip you have when someone rushed you out the door and there was no time to explain. I stepped out before the car stopped moving. My heels clicked on the hot pavement. It was mid-July in Houston, and the air sat on you like a wet blanket, but I walked the way I've always walked, steady, with somewhere to be. Marisol looked up when she heard me. Mom, her voice came out small. I sat down beside her on that bench. I didn't pull her into a hug right away. I looked at her face first. Her eyes were swollen, and her mascara had tracked down her cheeks and dried there. She'd been crying since morning and had run out. Tell me what happened. My voice was calm, calmer than I felt. She pressed her lips together. Her breath hitched. My father-in-law called me into the conference room. At 8 this morning, she said. He said there were discrepancies in the quarterly reports. Contracts I'd signed that I never touched. He had printouts. He had signatures. She stopped. They were my signatures, Mom, but I never signed those papers. I didn't move. Go on. My husband came home at noon. She glanced at my granddaughter, still sleeping, and lowered her voice. He said his father told him everything. He said he was embarrassed by me, that I'd brought shame to his family, that his mother cried when she found out. She looked at her hands. Then he said it. He said our bloodline wasn't the kind of stock his family needed tied to their name. The words landed. I let them settle. My daughter's chin trembled. He handed me a bag of Chloe's things. Then he drove away. My granddaughter stirred then, shifting against her mother's arm. She blinked up at me with those wide, half-asleep eyes. Grandma, are we going to your house now? I smoothed her hair back from her face. Yes, baby, right now. Marisol started to speak, to apologize for something. I could tell, the way she always apologized, for things that weren't her fault, and I stopped her. Get in the car. Reuben already had the trunk open. He loaded the bags without a word. He held the back door for Marisol. She climbed in with my granddaughter still half asleep in her arms. I got in the passenger seat, home. He nodded. He knew the address. My house in River Oaks. The one I'd bought for cash in 2009, with the proceeds from selling my first commercial property. 17,000 square feet, 3 acres, a pool in the back that my granddaughter called the ocean. The place I'd built from nothing, starting over at 35 when my marriage ended and I had 2 daughters, a rented apartment, and exactly 1 asset. A vacant retail strip in the Montrose neighborhood that everyone said was too small and too run down to matter. I let it matter. The drive took 22 minutes. Marisol didn't speak. My granddaughter fell back asleep, cheek pressed against her mother's shoulder. When we pulled through the gate, I turned to look at them both. You are safe now, I said. Marisol nodded, but her eyes didn't believe me yet. Inside, I took them upstairs. Marisol ran a bath for my granddaughter. I heard the water running, and then I heard my daughter crying through the closed door. Quiet, controlled crying. The kind that comes after you've been holding it for hours and finally feel like you can let go. I stood in the hallway for a moment and gave her that. Then I walked downstairs to my office and made a call. Reuben answered before the second ring. I need a full audit of Price Property Group, I said. Every lease, every LLC, every bank account my son-in-law's father has touched in the last 3 years, and pull the title records on every property in their portfolio. How fast? 48 hours. A pause. Understood. I stood at my office window, overlooking the back garden, and I let myself think through what my son-in-law's father did not know. He did not know that Price Property Group had been operating for 4 years out of a building that I owned. Not him, not his family. The building at 2200 Greenway Plaza, the one with his name on the lobby directory, the one where he held investor meetings and signed leases and accepted awards, which was owned by a trust held by a holding company registered in Delaware. My son-in-law's father was a tenant. My son-in-law's father was a well-dressed, gold-cuff-linked Houston Business Journal cover story tenant who had no idea who his landlord was. I'd arranged it that way in 2020 when Marisol told me she was marrying into that family. I'd run a check on them within 48 hours of hearing the last name. What Ruben found wasn't criminal, but it was a pattern. My son-in-law's father had built his business on leverage, other people's leverage. He'd cycled through partners and investors who ended up worse than when they started. He had a gift for making men feel chosen and women feel small. So I offered Marisol a position at his company. I'd quietly purchased a minority stake in Price Property Group through a shell entity 6 months earlier, which gave me board observer rights and access to internal financials. I placed her there as VP of Operations. She was brilliant at it. Better than any of them. And I watched from a distance to see what kind of man my son-in-law would become when he thought no one important was looking. Turns out I had seen enough. The knock came at 6:30 the next morning. Ruben let himself in through the side entrance and set a folder on my desk without preamble. I was already dressed. I'd slept 3 hours. He opened the folder. My son-in-law's father filed a police report yesterday at 4 p.m. He slid the document across to me. I read it without expression. Complainant, Stafford Price. Accused, Marisol Price, née Vega. Allegation, fraudulent execution of commercial lease agreements totaling $1.8 million. Forgery of authorized signatures, misappropriation of company funds. If it sticks, Ruben said quietly, she's looking at 7 years minimum. I set the papers down. It won't stick. He studied me. What do you need? Pull every operating line of credit Price Property Group holds, I said. Every facility, every account, every vendor payment schedule. I want them frozen by end of business today. That'll stop their operations within a week. Good, I picked up my phone, and get me Claudia Weir. Claudia was my lead attorney. She'd been handling my business interests for 14 years, and she had a gift for making complex documents come out in my favor. She answered on the second ring. Claudia, it's Eugenia. I need you at my house by 8. We have a criminal charge to dismantle and a company to reclaim. I'll bring coffee, she said. What my son-in-law's father didn't understand, what he'd never had the depth to consider, was that the moment he used Marisol's name to forge those leases, he was forging documents on properties that ran through my holding structure. He hadn't stolen from his own company. He'd stolen from mine, and he had done it using my daughter's name as the instrument. By noon, Ruben had confirmed what I suspected. The $1.8 million in fraudulent leases was only the beginning. There were 6 additional contracts bearing Marisol's signature, all forged, all executed within the last 18 months. My son-in-law had co-signed 2 of them. They'd used her name to originate a $3.2 million line of credit, collateralized against 3 properties in the portfolio, properties that were titled under Meridian Holdings, my properties. They had tried to borrow $3.2 million against land they did not own. At 3:40 that afternoon, Marisol's phone rang. We were in the living room, my granddaughter napping upstairs, Claudia beside me with her legal pad open. Marisol looked at the screen. "It's my husband," she whispered. "Answer it," I said, speaker. She did. Marisol, his voice was smooth, careful, measured the way voices get right before they snap. "I want to talk about Chloe." Claudia's pen moved. "Then talk," my daughter said. Her voice was steadier than I expected. "My father is willing to make this go away. All of it. The charges, the investigation. But we need a statement from you, acknowledging the lease agreements, saying it was a misunderstanding. I didn't sign those papers." "Marisol." He let her name sit there. "I know that. But Chloe needs stability right now. She needs both her parents." His voice softened at the edges. That practiced gentleness I'd noticed the first time I met him, the kind that felt like warmth and wasn't. "If you make this difficult, if your mother gets involved," he paused, "I'm going to have to think about what environment is best for my daughter. And I don't think a guest room at your mother's house qualifies." My daughter's hand went to her mouth. "Are you threatening me?" she whispered. "I'm offering you a solution," he said. "You have 24 hours. The line went dead. The room was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then Claudia looked up from her legal pad. "Extortion," she said. "Custodial coercion. We have it recorded." She met my eyes. "With the financial evidence, with the forged documents, we don't just win. We end them." I stood, walked to the window. Somewhere across this city, my son-in-law thought he was managing a situation. He had no idea the situation was managing him. Now, what comes next is something Marisol wasn't prepared to hear. I want to be honest with you about that, but it matters, because this was never only about my daughter. It never was. The file Ruben brought me 4 days after we'd brought Marisol home was labeled with a single word: pattern. He sat across from me and opened it without speaking. "Her name is Tanisha Crawford," he said. 36 years old, graphic designer. She and my son-in-law dated for 14 months beginning in early 2021, the same period he was already beginning to pursue Marisol. I looked at the photograph, a woman with warm eyes and natural hair, smiling in front of a mural somewhere in Midtown Houston. She looked like someone who'd been through something and come out the other side still standing. "Same pattern," Ruben said. He moved her into his place within 3 months, began isolating her from her friends, convinced her to give up her freelance work. Then he started taking money, a little at first. Then her entire savings, 30 over 4 years, told her she'd given it voluntarily. When she filed a police report, he'd already moved on. Nothing stuck. He spread another document on my desk. There's more. He kept records, files he thought he'd deleted from a shared cloud account. He looked at me steadily. He documented it, Eugenia, like it was a project. "Show me." The clip was 40 seconds. My son-in-law alone, calm, speaking toward his phone camera. "Day 62, he said. She apologized today for crying during dinner. Said she didn't want to disturb me." A pause, almost there. I closed the video. My hands were flat and still on the table. "He's done this more than twice," I said. Ruben nodded. "Tanisha is the one we found. There may be others." I stood, picked up my phone, and called Claudia. When she answered, I said 4 words: "We need to find Tanisha." She came on a Sunday afternoon. A silver car pulled through my gate, and a woman in jeans and a pale blue blouse stepped out. Her eyes moved across the property the way careful people's eyes move, taking measure of everything without making it obvious. I opened the door myself. "Miss Crawford, thank you for coming." She looked at me steadily. "Your lawyer said you had information about him." "I do, and I think you have information that can help my daughter. Please come in." Marisol was already in the living room. She stood when Tanisha walked in. They looked at each other, these 2 women who had never met, who had nothing obvious in common. And then something happened the way it sometimes does, between people who have lived through the same thing. A recognition that has nothing to do with faces. Tanisha spoke first. "It wasn't your fault." Marisol's eyes filled immediately. She stood. They reached for each other, these two strangers, and held on. I stepped back and gave them the room. After a while, they sat down together. I brought tea. Claudia arrived and settled into the chair across from them with her legal pad. "Tell me what happened," I said gently. Tanisha held her cup in both hands. "I met him at a networking event downtown. He knew all the right things to say. 4 months in, he convinced me to stop taking on my own clients. Said it was better for us." Her voice was flat and controlled. The way voices get when you've told a story enough times that the pain has smoothed down, but the shape of it is exactly still theirs then. Then he started taking money. By the time I understood what was happening, I had nothing, and when I filed a report, he was already gone. Marisol nodded. "He told me my mother was controlling, that my friends didn't really know me, that he was the only one who actually understood me." Tanisha turned to look at her. "Same words," she said quietly, "almost exactly." "Marisol," I said gently, "there's something else. Ruben found video files. I need you to watch something." She looked at me, her hands tightened in her lap. Then she nodded. I played it 40 seconds. My son-in-law alone with his camera, calm and methodical. Day 62, almost there. When it ended, Marisol sat very still. Then she said, in a voice barely above a whisper, "He said those words to me." Day 62. She closed her eyes. I thought he was growing. I thought he was working on himself. "He was keeping score," I said. Claudia set down her pen. With Tanisha's testimony, with this recording, with the forged documents, and the extortion call, we can build a federal case. Pattern predation. Criminal fraud. She looked at Tanisha. "What we need is your willingness to sit across from him in a courtroom." Tanisha didn't hesitate. "I've been sitting across from him in my head for 3 years. I'm ready to do it in person." They talked for another 2 hours. Same lines. Same timing. Same script used on different women in different years, like a tool he'd sharpened and put away and taken out again. By the time Tanisha left, she and Marisol had exchanged numbers and made plans to meet again. That night, Marisol found me in my office. "Mom." She looked at the desk, the folders, the city, through the window. "What do you actually own?" I looked at her for a long moment. Then I told her everything. The properties. The holding companies. The trust. The building at 2200 Greenway Plaza, where my son-in-law's father held his investor meetings and hung his name on the lobby wall. I told her about the observer seat on his board, about placing her there on purpose, about 4 years of watching and waiting. She was quiet for almost a full minute when I finished. Then she said, "He fired me from your company." "Yes." "He used my name to steal from your company." "Yes." Her expression moved through something complicated. Grief, anger, and then something harder and quieter underneath both of those. Something that looked like purpose. "What happens next?" she said. I picked up my phone and typed 2 words to Ruben. "It's time." The Houston Commercial Real Estate Summit was held every year at the Post Oak Hotel in Uptown. Black tie, 500 attendees. Every developer, investor, and property attorney in the city in one room. This year's honoree, my son-in-law's father, receiving the Legacy Builder Award from the Greater Houston Real Estate Council. The event organizers had called me the week prior, uncertain whether to proceed. I told them not to change a single thing. I said my son-in-law's father deserved his moment in front of the city's eyes. I wore a cream-colored suit, no jewelry except the pearl earrings my mother left me. I stood near the back of the ballroom with Marisol on my left and Tanisha on my right. We didn't sit at a table. We didn't accept champagne from the passing trays. We watched. My son-in-law's father took the stage at 8:15. He wore a tuxedo that fit the way expensive things fit men who've been measured for them their whole lives. He held the award, a glass obelisk with his name engraved on the base, and he smiled. "I've spent 40 years," he began, "building this city brick by brick. Through good markets and bad, I've held to one principle. That real estate is about legacy. about leaving something behind. Scattered applause. On my phone, I typed 2 words to my contact in the AV booth. Begin now. The lights dimmed, just barely, just enough that heads turned. The projection screen behind him flickered twice. He glanced over his shoulder. His smile tightened. White text appeared on black, clean, impossible to ignore. The truth about the Price legacy. The first document, the forged lease agreements, Marisol's signature highlighted in red, the forensic examiner's certification that every single one was fabricated, side by side with her actual signature samples. A second document, the $3.2 million line of credit application, the properties listed as collateral, and underneath, the title records showing those properties belonged to Meridian Holdings, LLC, not to Price Property Group, not to my son-in-law's father. Never to him. A woman near the front gasped, then another voice somewhere in the middle of the room. The applause that had been warming up went cold. My son-in-law's father grabbed the microphone with both hands. Ladies and gentlemen, there has obviously been some kind of technical. His audio cut out mid-sentence. He tapped the microphone, shook it. The room heard nothing from the podium. But the screen kept going. The recording of my son-in-law's phone call filled the room's speakers, his voice smooth and certain. I'm going to have to think about what environment is best for my daughter. Then Marisol's voice underneath it, barely audible. Are you threatening me? Then the video. My son-in-law alone, speaking to his camera. Day 62. She apologized today for crying during dinner. Almost there. Then a second clip. Different angle. Earlier date. A different woman's apartment. Same cadence. Same flatness. Day 47. She asked permission to call her sister. I told her it wasn't a good idea. We're making progress. The room erupted. I heard the word predator from 3 different directions. I heard serial. I heard monster. I heard someone say I invested in that company. And I heard someone else say I knew something was wrong with him. My son-in-law's father stood frozen on the stage, with a dead microphone in his hand, the award in the crook of his other arm, and the evidence playing behind him in a room full of the people he'd spent his career performing for. I walked to the front. Marisol and Tanisha came with me. We climbed the steps to the stage. I took the working podium microphone. My name is Eugenia Vega, I said. I am the sole owner of Meridian Holdings, LLC, which holds title to the majority of properties in the Price Property Group portfolio. My son-in-law's father has been operating his business from land and buildings that belong to me. He is my tenant. He has been my tenant for 4 years. Total silence. He fired my daughter, his own employee, based on crimes he and his son committed using her forged signature. He filed a criminal complaint against her for stealing from a company that was stealing from my holdings. He orchestrated that complaint as leverage to silence her and protect his fraud. I looked at him directly. The lease on the building at 2200 Greenway Plaza expires in 60 days. Under the bad faith termination clause in that lease, I am activating early termination effective immediately. My son-in-law's father will vacate my property within 30 days. People started talking all at once. Cameras came out. I stepped back from the microphone. Tanisha stepped forward. My name is Tanisha Crawford, she said. Her voice was steady and clear, and it carried across that silent, glittering room without any effort at all. I am one of the women my daughter's husband targeted before he targeted Marisol Vega. I am here to tell you that what you just watched was not an isolated incident. It was a system, a script. A predator operating with the protection of his father's money and his father's reputation. She paused. That protection ends tonight. The ballroom doors opened. Detective Paul Hines of the Houston Police Department Economic Crimes Unit walked in, badge visible, 4 officers behind him. Stafford Price, Xavier Price. Detective Hines's voice was calm and deliberate. You are under arrest for fraud, forgery, extortion, and criminal conspiracy. The officers moved efficiently. My son-in-law's father dropped the glass award. It didn't shatter, it just hit the stage and rolled, catching the spotlight, turning slowly. They cuffed him. They cuffed my son-in-law where he stood frozen near the front row of tables. My son-in-law looked at me as they turned him toward the doors. His face was something I'd never seen on it before. Stripped of the performance, stripped of the calculation, stripped of everything down to just a person, realizing that every move he thought he was making had been visible the entire time. I looked back at him and said nothing. The sentence came down 11 weeks later. My son-in-law's father received 14 years in federal prison and $3 million in restitution. My son-in-law received 12 years. The judge cited the documented pattern of predation, the exploitation of multiple victims, the deliberate use of a family member's identity to perpetrate fraud. When the bailiff led them from the courtroom, I watched Marisol. She sat with her shoulders back and her chin level, the way she used to sit when she was 7 years old working through a hard math problem. Focused, steady, not afraid of the difficulty. Tanisha squeezed her hand. Claudia leaned toward me and said simply, "Clean." By the following month, Marisol had been installed as president of what was now Vega Property Management, operating under the Meridian Holdings umbrella. Her first act was to meet with every employee to explain what had happened and what was coming. Her second was to promote Gail Simmons, the senior accounts manager who had quietly flagged 2 of the fraudulent leases months earlier and been ignored by my son-in-law's father. Gail cried when Marisol handed her the offer letter. "We don't ignore people who tell the truth in this company," Marisol told her. "Ever." I sat in the back of the room and didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Tanisha's nonprofit opened in the Midtown Arts District the following spring. She called it Steady Ground. It offered housing navigation, legal aid referrals, financial recovery counseling, and a documentation hotline for women experiencing financial abuse at the hands of partners. On opening day, she called me. 11 calls in the first 2 days, Eugenia. 11. They're out there. They've been out there. "I know," I said. "Now someone's answering." That evening, I drove to Herman Park. I parked and walked to the reflecting pool, the one my granddaughter and I had visited every few months since she was big enough to throw bread to the ducks. I sat on a bench and waited. Marisol arrived with Chloe on her hip. Tanisha came a few minutes later, still in her dress from the opening. The 3 of us sat together in the late Houston light. My granddaughter ran to the edge of the water, arms spread wide, delighted by every duck that moved toward her. Marisol said quietly, 6 months ago I was sitting in a parking lot with everything I owned in 3 bags. I watched my granddaughter laughing. I know. I thought it was the end of everything. I know. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Why didn't you just tell me about the company, about owning the building, about all of it? Why did you let me stay there 4 years not knowing?" I thought about that. The honest answer wasn't simple. "Because you needed to know what you were made of without my name attached to it," I said, finally. "I needed you to do the work on your own terms. I needed them to show me who they were when they believed they were untouchable, and I needed to see what you would do when things got hard." She looked at me. "I watched you for 4 years, Marisol. You were the most capable person in that building. They knew it. That's why they needed your name. Because they couldn't do what you could do. They could only steal from it." Her eyes filled. She looked away toward the water. My granddaughter crouched at the edge of the reflecting pool and picked something up. She turned around, clutching it in her small fist, and ran back to us. She climbed up onto the bench between me and her mother and opened her hand. A smooth gray stone, flat on one side, cracked down the middle, a hairline fracture running top to bottom, but the stone still holding its shape, still whole. "Grandma, I found a broken one." She looked up at me with absolute seriousness. "Should I put it back?" I took it from her carefully, turned it in the light. "You know what, Chloe?" I said. The crack is how you know it's survived something. Keep it. She considered this with the gravity of a 4-year-old deciding something important. Then, she took the stone back and tucked it into her coat pocket. Okay. Marisol laughed, not loudly, just a small sound surprised out of her, like warmth returning to a room that had been cold for too long. Tanisha put her arm around Marisol's shoulder. The ducks moved across the still water. The city hummed somewhere beyond the trees. Before we go, I want to leave you with what I know to be true after 63 years. Love does not ask you to disappear. A partner who isolates you from your family, who controls your money, who documents your surrender like a project. That is not love. That is a system, and systems can be dismantled. I am Eugenia Vega. I built something from nothing, and when someone tried to use what I'd built to destroy my daughter, I used every tool I had, not for revenge, for protection, for the women who called Tanisha's hotline that first week, and the women who will call and the women who will call next month, and the women sitting right now in some parking lot somewhere in this country with 3 bags around them and a child asleep on their shoulder, trying to figure out what comes next. Something comes next, I promise you that. Check on the people you love. Ask the uncomfortable questions. When someone in your family is being isolated, don't mistake silence for peace. That's not peace. That's a door closing. And if you're the one sitting on that bench right now, hear me. Get in the car. There is always a next step. There is always someone who can help you take it. The crack in the stone is not the end of the stone. Stay steady, stay free.